before we get into the agenda, I would like I'd like to move that we amend the agenda to move Videla Saftica's presentation on the tree planting, 711-3 updates of missing middle housing to the beginning of old business, because he has other meetings later on today. So can I get a second?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? All in favor? Patricia?
Aye.
Jam?
Aye.
Chris?
Aye.
Chardon?
Aye.
Point of order, now that you're
Oh.
meeting in person, you can just call a collective vote. You don't have to do a roll call.
Okay.
So you can say all in favor and then any opposed without having to do the roll call.
For anything?
For now that we're in person, yes.
Oh, good to know.
Anytime you're in a virtual or hybrid meeting, you would need to do a roll call.
All right. So we'll dispense with the roll call. It's been moved and seconded that we move Videla Saftica's presentation up to old business on the agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. I want to continue with introductions. Kim?
Kim Roney, Asheville City Council and liaison to the Urban Forestry Commission.
Thank you. Keith Aiken is not here today. He's out of town. Nancy?
I'm Nancy Watford, zoning supervisor in Planning and Urban Design Department. And one point of matter is please speak into the microphone so that it can be picked up on YouTube and heard clearly. It can be, if you don't speak in the microphone, it can be hard to hear if you're listening in online.
Okay, thank you. Jackson?
Jackson Marks, Planning Tech and Urban Design.
Madeline?
Madeline Stone, Planning Tech, Planning and Urban Design.
Chris?
Chris Collins, Assistant Director of Planning and Urban Design.
Videla?
Videla Saftica, Planning and Urban Design.
Mark?
Mark Foster, City Arborist.
Jade? Oh, Jade.
Jade Dundas, Capital Projects.
Thank you. And we also welcome one of our former commission members, Sharon Sumrall, who's now in the audience. Hi, Sharon. So first thing is approval of last meeting's minutes in December. So I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes of the December 2023 meeting. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. The minutes are approved. So we don't have any alternative compliance today, so we'll go to public comment, and I think the only person on the list is Sharon, is that correct? Okay. Sharon, please come forward. And you have 3 minutes.
And I'm going to look at Ed because he's timing me. Hi, everybody. I'm your past UFC chair, and I was also on the technical review committee. So hopefully every month I'm going to come in and because I've spent 6 years reviewing projects that ran through, and I'm going to come in and give you a little bit of update on some of the larger ones, just as an FYI. So we've got the Kessler Hotel, which is across from the Grand Bohemian, which is in the facing the Cathedral of All Souls, and it's in the Biltmore Historic District. And what's going on that is another hotel that's going to have 96 keys, and it's going to be over 100,000 square feet, and it's going to take up a lot of parking area, and I think it's a kiosk for Wells Fargo. What's going on is there is a plan to go through with 711-3, which is your landscape and buffering standards, that will and may be modified to remove building impact trees. Right now, it still stands at building impact trees, and this development requires 27 building impact trees. And they're asking for, it's a conditional zoning, so when you have a conditional zoning, it means you can ask for a technical modification, and a technical modification is basically a variation. We're just asking, they're asking for a condition, we can't meet this. So it runs through the processes, it goes through a TRC, goes to planning and zoning, and then it goes to council for council approval. With their not being able to meet, excuse me, the 27 building impact trees, when I eventually get in here to talk about the changes they're gonna make within 711.3, is that maybe 27 trees is a lot for over 100,000 square feet. They're required to put 19 trees within 711.3, which is the landscape and buffering standards, which is not having to do with 719. And they're saving 8 existing, so means that they're adding 11. All right, so, but they're removing 27, meaning they're not going to put that. So it's basically going to be a big, huge hotel, and it's across from the Grand Bohemian. Now, whether we have an opinion on that or not is why I'm coming in here, just to let you know what's going on. I have opinions, as you all know. The other one is, that's going on, it's called the Meadows at Hawk Creek. And the Meadows at Hawk Creek is 27 acres. And it's a CZ conditional zoning, and it's going to be mixed use, nothing affordable. And it's really farmland, old farmland, and wetlands. And the community of Hawk Creek is up in arms on how this is going because it is not conducive to what the neighborhood looks like, and they're pretty well developing it from setback to setback of what they're required to do. They have not submitted their technical modifications, so we don't know what they're asking for yet, but before they go to planning, it's 3 minutes already? Well, you will see me next month with more. Keep in touch. If any of you have any questions, just send me an email. Thank you.
Could she go a little longer on this project? Maybe 3 more minutes?
Well,
Technically, we have a 3-minute limit unless someone has 3 people that cede their time. But it's what an invaluable resource to have a former UFC member to bring forward this information that maybe we hadn't had the time to hear. So it is common in public meetings for the chair or vice chair to ask that the participant could submit their comments in writing to the board. If that's something that wouldn't take too much time.
thank you, Sharon.
Thank you.
There's no other public comment, so we'll move into staff reports. As I said, Keith isn't here at this meeting. So, Mark?
Yes.
You need to come up.
I can just yell at the mic in the corner.
And Mark, I think you have a seat here if you wanted one.
Oh, I have a spot?
Yeah, that's you. You have your own microphone.
Hi. So it's pretty much routine stuff this time of year. We are grinding stumps, we're doing tree work. We've got a contractor that should be planting 18 trees in the rights of way, say either March or April sometime, depending on how quickly he gets his materials. So, taking down some holiday decorations that we kind of left up a little bit. I was kind of hoping we could stretch them out to Valentine's Day, but apparently the public didn't like that, so we put aside more pressing things for the moment to get those taken down. That's about it.
Actually, I can't remember where this came from, but it may have been Karen. Somebody mentioned the recommendation of Public Works considering moving all the holiday decorations work away from you and bringing it somewhere else so that your activities regarding the preservation, planning, and maintenance of trees on public land can go uninterrupted. Is that a realistic proposal or idea?
It's appreciated, but it hasn't happened so far. It's come up repeatedly over the years, requesting that it find another department to live in. My department and prior to them, Parks and Rec, when Parks and Rec had the tree crews way back in the 90s, they had a bucket truck, and so, hey, there are things you need to hang from poles, you're the people for the job, congratulations, here's this thing to do. So ideally, it would be with, in my opinion, it would be with a city department that is geared toward increasing visitation to the city and, so decorating it and that kind of thing. And that there'd be a contract line that they could use to have a contractor put up and take down the decorations each year. Our decorations are also getting pretty long in the tooth and ratty looking, and they'll need to be replaced soon. So that's some additional funds, but that's something yet to be figured out, I guess.
Ed?
Yeah, I'm familiar with other cities, and they do employ contract services for Christmas decorations rather than using internal crews. And perhaps we should just render a recommendation for city council to consider, one, do a cost-benefit analysis, because I think if you factor in what it costs for Public Works to do it, including the time taken away from other work that Public Works is doing, I think that it would probably be more cost-effective to contract out Christmas decorations.
We used to have
render
a
that
contractor.
recommendation.
We used to have a contractor that was doing even more than what we're doing currently. We used to light up the building faces along Biltmore Avenue and Wall Street and Lexington, maybe it was, until it dawned on us that, hey, this is private property, we probably shouldn't be decorating this. And so we were able to pull back from that and get away from that contract. But yeah, having a contractor doing this stuff that we're doing that kills a month worth of productivity on the putting it up end and 2 to 3 weeks on the taking it down and putting it away end, it would certainly be time better spent doing tree work.
Karen, it was your idea. Do you have any comments or thoughts?
I would like to, for us to make a formal recommendation to City Council to keep arborist activities under the purview of the arborist, or City Arborist Mark and his crew. And if that is not amenable, then a cost-benefit analysis.
Did you have your hand up, Sardella?
No, I have a different topic. I did want to ask a Mark a question, but different topic.
Zoe?
This might be a silly suggestion, but is it something that tourist development, whatever it's called now, could be encouraged to take over? To actually, come up with new decorations and work with the downtown association, take that off the city's plate?
I will say, that if that question is directed at me, because I see eyes pointing in this direction.
Yes.
I just came from the first of 3 public meetings today about the new potential business improvement district, and holiday decorations were brought up as very commonly managed by business improvement districts. Typically bids go above and beyond the base level services of cities and counties. So that conversation is happening in our community. As it pertains to the scope of work of the Urban Forestry Commission, what I haven't heard yet, but I'm hearing hints at, is that there might be a recommendation for us to consider a cost-benefit analysis of moving this responsibility as a base level service out of the current staffing plan because of the need to focus on arborist work.
Chris?
Mark, what would be, just so we're all on the same page, what would be some of the tasks that you are not able to get to during that time of year that you would be able to get to if you weren't doing Christmas lights?
Well, it's everything that gets lined up in our queue, and that is removing high-risk trees. That's what I would like to be focusing on primarily. Since my time is not usually spent with the crew that's out doing bucket truck stuff, I can be doing a certain amount of plant healthcare type work and developmental pruning on small trees like I normally do downtown. I think somebody everybody's seen me downtown once pruning a tree, which is kind of a routine for me. But it's my larger task queue that falls to my bucket truck crew, singular at the moment, still trying to get fully staffed. The work that they do, their routine work, that's what gets put back an extra month on the front end and another 2-3 weeks on the takedown end.
I guess a question that might come up, because I'm imagining that this might have been moved onto your very full plate, is because it's winter. So maybe an additional follow-up question could be, what are some of the obvious things that you do during the winter to care for trees? Like, is that a good time to plant new trees?
We plant by contractor. Our staffing level doesn't permit being able to keep up with our regular queue of work and add planting. We tried that several years ago when I had a really bad contractor experience. They had planted some trees in front of somebody's house, and she had taken a bunch of pictures to document, how happy she was to have trees in front of her house. And some of the pictures included images of the trees being picked up by the trunk with a strap. So I wasn't really pleased about that, and so I stopped doing contract planting for a few years, and we did it ourselves, but it just put us farther behind. So I realized we had to go back to contractor.
See, I'm not sure if there's like a winter-specific list that might add to a recommendation. I hear you saying like if there's big storms and there might be tree removal or limb removal that requires attention.
I have a 2-year backlog of risk tree removals, and so that generates a considerable number of calls and emails wanting to know when their work is going to be performed. And they have reason to be legitimately concerned about that.
So I think
And
that
if you have a tree at risk, and you're kicking the can down the road for a year, 2 years, that risk will increase.
Right.
The
Right.
likelihood of failure just increases,
So that could be part of a recommendation, is that an acknowledgement that the current backlog grows when our staff is removed from the work.
Yeah, when I had 2 functioning crews, I was only a year behind on risk stuff.
Could I add something? Can we contract removals out and keep the planting in-house?
We would probably need to, and keep the planting in-house. We would probably need to find a lot of contracting money, because essentially it costs twice as much for me to have contractors perform the work that we do. I guess they get paid better. And it's been, sometimes it's difficult to get contractors who are interested in doing business with the city, because the city's processes for paying invoices can be kind of cumbersome and slow.
Since it seems like you've had discussions within the department about removing the responsibility for putting up and taking down holiday lights, if we made a recommendation to the city council for a cost analysis on that, do you think that's something that the department leadership would support?
I think at this point I have the backing of my own department.
Okay.
I think the change hasn't happened a little farther up through the organization.
Okay. So Karen, would you be willing to revise your recommendation slightly to put emphasis on recommending to the city council that a cost analysis be done regarding the the holiday lights?
Yes, let's start with that. That seems like a good place to start.
Okay. Would you like to make a motion?
I make a motion that we make a formal recommendation to City Council to do a cost-benefit analysis on hanging the holiday light.
A second.
It's been moved and seconded that we make a recommendation to the city council to do a cost analysis on the putting up and removing of holiday lights with the idea of potentially removing this from the responsibility of the city arborist so that the city arborist can concentrate on matters related to trees on public property. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. The recommendation, the motion is unanimously approved. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, members of the commission. Is there anything else for Mark? Chardon.
Yeah, I had a question. And I wanted to look this up before I came in, and forgive me if there's an ignorance here, but I have a vague, foggy memory of there being like a finable offense for topping trees on commercial property in the city. Is that?
Commercial property would fall under Keith, so
Okay.
I would be guessing probably incorrectly about what the fine might be.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay. That used to not be under.
It's always been
your.
in development services, planning type stuff. Commercial
Gotcha.
sites are regulated by that.
Okay.
I'm the rights of way.
So that's a Keith question.
Yes, I'm the rights of way and parks.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Is there any other staff member who might be able to shed a light or?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So trees on commercial properties are, if they're required, or required for protection, required landscaping, or in steep slope. Steep slope is more residential, and it applies for both of them. But there is a enforcement process where they will be sent a notice of violation. They will have a chance to come into compliance prior to serving citations with fines.
Okay. What does that compliance look like if they've topped their trees?
I think I'm not sure what it is. I mean, it would, now that we have Keith, we can work with
Yeah.
Keith to come up with that. But a lot of times it is actually replacement
Okay.
of the tree or the equivalency of. And sometimes y'all have seen some of those that have come in for alternative landscaping through, not an alternative compliance, but it's alternative landscaping, where folks have gone in and removed trees that are in a protected area. And so they come to ask for to come get a corrective measure plan to do replanting and preservation of saplings and things that may have still remained.
Sure.
So,
Well, I'll follow up with Keith. I've just noticed
Yeah.
like, I don't know, 3 or 4 commercial properties just in the last couple of days that,
Oh,
just
yeah.
everything got topped. Just curious about.
you can follow up with Keith. You can also enter any of those violations into the Asheville app,
Yeah.
and those will go to the compliance team that will go out on site and make a record and then work with Keith on corrective actions.
Cool. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Nancy. If there's no other questions for Mark, thanks, Mark. We'll move on to the tree canopy preservation report. Nancy?
Any questions? I did
Okay.
add a summary item, like the last item is the total since the Article 19 went into place, to give you all a little snapshot of where we are from.
So I have one question. I take it that to date, none of this money has been spent?
No.
Okay. We'll address that later. Any questions for Nancy? Thank you, Nancy. So we'll move on to old business. Vidila? Here we go. Where? This presentation, So Vidila is going to go over a lot of territory on his presentation. For the sake of trying to limit this meeting to 2 hours, we'll have about 15 to 20 minutes of questions and comments, and then we'll have to cut it off and move on.
Thank you, UFC commissioners. My name is Vidila Satvika. I was asked to give an update to landscaping and its relationship to middle housing updates that we're working on for zoning. So here we'll jump into it. I think a lot of you have seen some of these key proposed landscaping changes that we've been drafting sort of in the background for a couple of years with a small group of people. And I'm not going to go into the details of all these, but I'm showing them here so that we can talk about some others. But I'll just sort of read through them and maybe we can chat about any of these if there are questions. In the UDO, we have outdated images, so we're doing minor updates like that. We're proposing to establish a third-party inspection process so that once you have a landscaping plan, you actually have a process to ensure that your plan goes in the ground correctly and the trees are properly planted. We're proposing a new plan set that would highlight and separate out required minimum soil volumes and the placement of utilities. Utilities are typically on a separate plan sheet, and so sometimes when you see the landscaping sheet and the utilities, it's hard to make sense where there might be some conflicts, and that leads to problems down the road. So hopefully this new plan set will help to obviate those or to reduce the number of problems before we get to construction. There will be an amended tree species list that some of you have been working on. We're suggesting requiring new formal plans for projects, the level 1 projects over 1,500 square feet, where today they do not have to be submitted formally with professional designers, and that also creates problems. We're suggesting new soil volume standards, new green roof standards for certain buildings. We are suggesting to drop building impact because we have landscaping, the tree canopy preservation ordinance, and some other changes we're suggesting. For parking lots, we're suggesting some changes that would actually drop the number of trees, but the trees are going to have larger soil volume standards. So from the analysis that we've conducted, this looks like it'll be better for trees all around. Less is more sometimes. Number 10, potentially increasing the requirement of a percentage for tree canopy preservation in Class C. And that was sort of a mitigation for the building impact. And then related updates to the standards and specifications details manual. So there's two other things I really wanted to focus and talk about today and get your thoughts. The first one is a potential new requirement to require new development of that single family or duplex to require trees. Today it's not required unless you're part of a subdivision. So if you have a vacant lot and you want to build a house, you don't have to plant any trees. The suggestion here is that we would now have a standard for that. And we can talk through that a little bit. And then 13, and this is really speculative, so I'm bringing it up maybe just to plant some seeds for how trees may be impacted based on forthcoming middle housing zoning updates, but we don't have clarification on what those are right now. We're kind of developing with a small group to bring some concepts to the Planning and Economic Development Committee of Council on March 11th. And when we have some formal ideas, we'll be able to better know. But for now, I'm going to speculate a little bit and tell you how some of these changes may impact trees. So first, this new requirement for single family and duplex development. So I'm highlighting here that in this paragraph or sentence that it's understood that with missing middle housing, what we're trying to do is provide more housing opportunity in Asheville. This will likely lead to potentially more development. and to be careful not to have too much negative impact from development, we're looking at how else we can mitigate development's impacts. And one of them is requiring a new standard that we don't require today. And so that would be a new tree planting standard. And what we have, sort of what we're throwing out there as an option, is requiring 1 new tree per lot. And we're suggesting, after having some conversations with legal, that it be within the landscaping section of the code, not with the tree canopy preservation section. That seems like it might be less of a concern from a legal perspective, and easier to kind of fly under the radar. There's this, I hear a continual concern that we don't want to be too large in changes with tree planting to potentially have some pushback from the state legislature. So this is the thinking. Here are some jurisdictions in this chart, in this spreadsheet, in this little chart down below, showing what other communities that we've found require tree planting for single family. You can see for Charlotte, they require a minimum of 1 tree per lot in single family and duplexes, and the property owners are responsible for the maintenance. Durham requires that both street trees are required and one tree per lot. So it's a little bit across the, there's a little bit of mix here. Sugar Mountain says that you have to provide 20% tree canopy. Pinehurst was sort of the most restrictive that I've seen. They require trees in all setbacks. So you have to have your front setback planted, your side setbacks, and your rear setback. We're not proposing that, but trying to let you know that there is precedent for single-family development with tree requirements, so our legal department is open to doing this and to looking at it. So before I move forward, any thoughts about this consideration? Yeah, Ed.
Yeah, I'm glad to see it. If I could make some suggestions, and I suspect this will go back to the committee for discussion, but there's probably some way that you can incentivize tree protection in this. The option to protect a tree and give a builder more credit than if they plant the tree, if the tree is and its roots are successfully protected. And then I thought that it might be better to just continue with the canopy focus. So X amount of square foot of canopy provided on a per lot basis, which would could either be tied to the square footage of the lot or square footage of the house, but allow you to quantify the ecosystem services collectively over time by keeping track of the canopy like we are with the canopy amendment, which helps further justify the existence for, the type of regulation. If we planted, 100,000 square feet of canopy with single-family development, it equates to X amount of stormwater management, for example, which really strengthens the policy.
Yeah, excellent. I think that makes a lot of sense. So moving forward, we'll definitely work with you all to draft some code. But yeah, sorry, this was sort of simplistic, but for sure we would want to incentivize preservation. So some language in there that might lead development to create a design that moves a building away from the footprint of a tree and to somehow give them more credit or more of an incentive to do that. I think that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, we've heard also that maybe lot sizes vary, so we want to somehow qualify it to the size of lot, so maybe a percentage or something.
I really like the, oh, sorry.
I was going to share some other thoughts. So I think that it would be interesting to explore additional alternatives to planting trees that would still be meeting ecological goals as options. So for example, that might be something like maybe the site is not conducive to planting trees for whatever reason, or it would result in, I could see this, depending on how policy's written, like, I foresee a lot of options of planting smaller trees and not a lot of large canopy trees. So some other menu of options could be, like, maybe the developer has the option to expand the right-of-way. So you have a bigger soil volume there and a better space for larger trees for the city, or installing stormwater management or other green infrastructure in place of planting trees. I'm just curious about the idea of, are there other menus of options that could be used, that could be presented to developers, so they feel like there's more opportunities that might, and more flexibility with how they are meeting the requirements.
My, I guess, initial thought is, I guess, you know, you can always add complexity to the code, and there's usually a way to do that. So it's a balance, and to see what the trade-offs are. I think my assumption was that tree planting was the priority for this commission. You know, I think if we were to weigh options that would have to do with stormwater or other things, it really would make it more difficult. And this is, without getting into details, this is one large basket of changes we're proposing, along with middle housing changes that have to do with housing and parking. So I would be a little bit concerned about getting into too much detail, providing too many options, even though it is theoretically possible. That I'd like to try to keep it as simple as can, and to meet the mission of this commission, which is trees and tree canopy.
Yeah, and I'm just more throwing it out there for like a future consideration that, like, I think in the end, whether it's a tree commission or sustainability, like, we're all working towards like similar goals, and sometimes they get siphoned. And so as we're like building upon this foundation, maybe it's something to consider is how can we like make sure that we're considering all those goals at the same time.
Yeah.
But yeah, no.
Yeah, excellent. No, and I that makes a lot of sense. For example, in our parking, in the landscaping codes part relating to parking lot landscaping, we're suggesting that you can do a 30-foot bioswale, but we'll allow you to reduce that smaller if you plant more trees, and so it kind of gives some options. So in general, I think that's a great idea, and maybe at some point when we have a stormwater manual, we'll have integrated all of different environmental goals.
Karen?
I just wanted to comment that I appreciate that this is happening, but also that I really like the Village of Sugar Mountains guideline of all single-family development have 20% tree canopy, because it's just so straightforward. And, and it, you know, speaks to canopy and lot size.
We could look at that. I think we wouldn't want to go over 10% because we wouldn't want single-family development to be more restrictive than the tree canopy preservation ordinance. And in Class B, we get up to 10% if you preserve some trees. So looking, though, at that 10% number and one tree, on a typical, like a 5,000 square foot lot, one large maturing tree, we give it over 500 square feet of credit, which is about 10%. So it kind of matches up, you know, there's different ways to approach it,
Yeah,
but
I was curious how that would match up with what's already happening.
yeah.
Chardon?
Just a simple question. Would the tree planting be subject to third-party inspection?
That's something we haven't figured out specifically. When we stop the third-party inspection, do we require them to hire, professional inspector for one tree? I think that might be too much. But what is the minimum threshold is something we haven't finalized.
Yeah. Why would it be too much?
Some people might say that I'm required to contract with, pay extra fees to guarantee that one tree is planted correctly. We could get pushback from that because the trade-off always in this stuff is, how are we increasing the cost of housing we're trying, housing is a key priority to the sort of trees, but to what extent are we trying to make a nice balance?
Yeah, speaking from a professional standpoint, most trees are planted incorrectly, and so if you're trying to
Yeah.
implement something that's gonna last into the future and have economic benefit, tree canopy benefit, that happens the day of planting. So I would highly recommend having third-party inspection on any tree being planted.
Any tree? Okay, well, we can look at that, and maybe that's the way it'll go forward.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks.
Okay.
I do have one question. The reason, when you had your discussions with legal, and they suggested having this amendment apply to 711.3 as opposed to 719. Of course, 719 is based on the planning or preservation planning or fee in lieu on tree canopy as measured by square footage. This proposal right now, anyway, has to do with number of trees. Was there a concern from legal that putting this amendment in 711.3, we couldn't require that it be based on tree canopy coverage as opposed to number of trees?
I don't think so. And we didn't get into too many details. The first meeting was really just to get their general feeling on, is this viable, and are they okay with us moving forward? And the answer was yes. So I think we'll try to develop some codes, some concepts, and work with you on those, and then see if they're okay with what we develop.
Thank you.
Mhm. All right, so I have one more slide. Well, not true. I have a few more slides, but this last part. This is me speculating how potential middle housing zoning changes might affect trees. And I'm pulling out 3 bullets here on some changes that I think are for discussion. One, primarily we're proposing to allow more housing typologies throughout Asheville, but at the same time capping the building footprints. So where the idea is, in the bulk of residential zoning districts, you can only build a single-family house. And so we're suggesting that we would move forward in a way that would allow more than that everywhere in the city or in large parts of the city. We're talking about some off-street parking reductions and adjusting driveway standards. So for this first thing, this is an image of residential zoning districts in shades of yellow and orange. Yellow are shades of single-family zoning districts, and orange are shades of multifamily zoning districts. And the bubble, the black line, isn't the city boundary. It's the Middle Housing's report analysis of 10-minute walk within walkable areas or goods and services and transit. So these are kind of the key places that they suggest are most appropriate for middle housing. And I think what I wanted to highlight to you is that we're thinking to propose a form-based code that would state something like, as long as we keep the buildings, look at the building on the left here, the smaller building, the footprint maximum width and maximum depth dimensions so that developers or property owners can't build larger than that you could fit, make that building for one family, or you can make it a duplex. You can cut it up into 4, make it smaller units, but that the building wouldn't change. And so what that does is it should, in theory, allow for more land to be used for other things. Now, having said that, there may be more parking there, so parking may take up more room. So it's a little bit hard to say, but what the form code does and what limits to building footprint do is they help to protect the amount of land that's gobbled up by the built environment. And so that sort of leads us to the next idea, which is the study suggests that we consider reductions to our off-street parking requirements. And what you see on the bottom left, the two images are a fourplex building on a smaller lot, one with 4 parking spaces and one with 8. And you can see if you have more parking spaces, you need more room. That's not a surprise. And so in theory, by reducing off-street parking requirements, people still drive. We live in a very car dependent city. People are going to drive, but maybe a change with reducing parking requirements on the margins would have people providing less surface parking. And that could lead to buildings like the one on the right, where you can see, there's 3 parking spaces, rather than they could probably put in 5 there, but there's room for a tree. So there's some potential benefit in reducing parking to benefit trees. And then last, we're suggesting to change driveway standards. Currently, we have a mix of driveway standards, both in the UDO and in our details manual. But effectively, we allow in residential properties to have 18-foot drives. So what you see on the bottom here, in lots of new development, we see basically an 18-foot wide concrete pour, so that basically 2 cars can pull in and park. And more of the historical pattern in older Asheville is what you see up above, which is more of a 9 to 12-foot driveway, at least for the apron and within the front setback, that then you allow the property owner to flare out for parking. What this does, it allows for more of the streetscape to be potentially used for grass or trees, like you can see on the top. The curb cuts and the driveways lead to less pavement space. And so that leads to more potential room for trees, at least in the front. Now, of course, if you have a rule like this, you may have more pavement in the back. So that could counterbalance or offset any benefits from not having as much pavement in the front. But there is at least potential for more trees with some reductions in driveway standards, at least in the front. So those were some considerations from middle housing. I'll leave it at that because we really don't have any details at this point.
Does anyone have any further questions for Villa? As you know,
I got
on
one.
yeah, Chris, sorry.
I just wanted to clarify, in the presentation, it seems like there's a zero-sum game between parking space and trees that is being discussed. Has the footprint of the building been, what's the discussion? We really can create whatever we want. And so what's the discussion been outside of kind of pitting those two against each other? Because it would be interesting to see what other creative solutions, I guess, have been discussed.
Well, so on one hand, the city can stop mandating requirements for parking. All that does is it takes the requirement off the books, but a lot of development, the financing requires parking. A lot of developments, they choose to park however much they think they need, and it may be as much as we currently require. In some cases, it's not. So it really depends on the project. I think the direction that a lot of cities are taking is the understanding that that the city doesn't know best in how much parking should be provided, and that a lot of times by setting minimum standards, you, in some cases, over-require parking so that people are building parking that they normally wouldn't. And that's where the problem lies, because when somebody pays for the creation of, parking spaces that aren't needed, that's where trees could be or more housing units could go. So You're right, there are, probably millions of scenarios where we can come up with parking, but at a minimum, we're thinking to try to reduce the requirement that the city puts on private development. But the parking may not even, in a lot of cases, will not change because we live in a society that is really dominated by that. And we're investing more in transit, we're trying to build more sidewalks, we're trying to build more bike lanes. So we're moving in that direction, maybe not fast enough, but we are moving in that direction. And reducing off-street parking requirements would support that. That's sort of a vague answer. I'm not sure if that.
No, thank you. I really appreciate you going down that rabbit hole with me.
Okay.
Anyone else? As you all know, I'm the UFC's representative on the Missing Middle Housing Implementation Working Group. And one of the things that we've discussed is whether or not to eliminate the landscape buffering in residential zones. The theory along that is that a lot of the, at least initial missing middle housing will be done along major corridors, we would think, and closer to the city. And the idea there is to create more walkable communities. And so if you look at a lot of the residents, like in, what is it, Five Corners or?
5 Points.
5 Points, yeah. Areas like that, there are a lot of residences that don't have landscape buffering between them and other buildings. The other proposal that's been brought up is potentially eliminating landscape buffering requirements between single-family houses and other missing middle housing buildings that would be have say 16 units in them, and then beyond that there would be landscape buffers. I did argue that landscape buffers does offer another opportunity to plant trees. But I would, and we'll discuss this again at our next meeting because we need to come up with a recommendation to take to planning and economic development and then planning and zoning and then ultimately the council. But there is trade-offs between all that's being discussed that could impact trees. And so I think when we get to that discussion, we need to, and I can prepare this, I can work with Padilla to prepare something to show the trade-offs, the balances, so that we can make a recommendation that will optimize the opportunities for not only preserving trees, but also planting trees. One thing I do want to say that when it comes to single-family, individual single-family construction and duplex construction, I would very much like to see the emphasis on preservation. Because I think if there's a mature tree or trees on that property that can be saved, that's where our emphasis is because, if you lose a mature tree that maybe has a tree canopy coverage of 1,600 square feet, and you plant a tree in its place, yes, there's a zero net loss of tree because tree's removed, the tree is planted, but initially anyway, there's a tremendous net loss of tree canopy coverage until that new tree reaches maturity and replaces the tree canopy coverage that we've lost in the removal of that mature tree. So I would also urge this commission to keep that in mind as we make our recommendations. Any other comments? Thank you very much, Fidela. Appreciate your work and coming here and presenting this to us.
Sure,
today.
thank you.
Chair, if I might, two things. One, what you just offered made me remember from your recent Urban Forestry Commission retreat, we heard from representatives who have put into place and advised on urban forestry master plans across the country. And one of the things that stuck out in my mind is a fund that folks could apply for to maintain trees on private property. And I happen to think that maybe that is a recommendation that could bubble up in future conversations. A second thing is in the missing middle housing study on page 151, it kind of gets into steep slope standards. And I haven't heard if the Urban Forestry Commission is going to make a recommendation regarding steep slopes in missing middle, but I also didn't see it in the presentation today. So just wanted to point out that I wouldn't be surprised if Urban Forestry had some advice to give on our steep slopes regarding our tree canopy.
Thank you. Anybody want to comment on that? Ed?
No, I haven't seen that. I haven't seen the recommendation, so I don't know. Is it suggesting that steep slope standards are inhibiting missing middle housing, or?
Maybe it's for a future conversation.
Right, okay.
As we get closer, but it is section 21. It says integrate missing middle housing into steep slope standards, develop steep slope standards to allow missing middle housing on lots that are more constrained due to topography. And it gives a list of, it looks like 6 recommendations. So I hadn't heard a recommendation from this committee. So I just wanted to let you know that it was on mind.
If I can just say, so we haven't thought about any proposed changes for steep slopes right now because we were sort of asked to create like a first. We can't do everything that the study is asking, which is many changes. I'll just say that, we obviously are interested in the watershed and steep slopes and would want to preserve anything that's there. I think the idea is that if we're limiting grading and limiting the number of maybe we don't need to limit the number of units. If it's the same size structure, if you allow let's say a 2,000 square foot structure in steep slopes, do we care if it's one family living there or 2? If we allow them to grade the same amount, maybe it doesn't matter. But we're not tackling that at this point.
Thank you. We've been joined by Stephanie. You want to introduce yourself?
Hi, hello. For those that don't know me, my name is Stephanie Dahl. I'm the Planning and Urban Design Director. Love your work. Just here to listen in. I was listening in on the YouTube for a little bit. Now I'm here in person, and Patrick and I talked quite a bit, so we'll be in touch.
Thank
And
you.
you
Welcome.
can always call me if you have a question. Do it through Patrick. All of that.
Thank you. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thanks.
Okay, so we'll go to working group updates. And the first working group is a policy working group. I just will note that since the retreat, Christy Fiore has become the chair of the policy working group. Ed Macy has become chair of the Urban Forest Master Plan Working Group, but I've asked Ed to give the update on the policy working group at this meeting because Chris is still sort of coming up to speed on what we've been doing. So, Ed?
All right, thanks, Patrick. We've already talked about the landscaping draft code, so I don't need to get into that. Chapter 20, the policy working group has sent their recommendations to the city, and we have since gotten feedback from Mark on the city's comments to our recommended revisions, and we have not had a chance to go over that as a group yet. So that's pending, and hopefully by next month we'll be able to respond to the city's response and set up a meeting to go through these with the city. I think that's the very next step. 719 tree canopy protection, we are pretty much done with our revisions. There's a couple of small issues that we still need to go over. And nothing's transpired since the last time we met, but I think the one outstanding issue is that related to the impact of boundary trees from developers. And we offered a recommendation back to the city, and I don't know where we are with that. So, Chris, if you have some update for us, that'd be great. Thanks.
Hey, Chris Collins, Planning and Urban Design Department. So overall update on 719 updates, we've gotten to a place where 711 and 719 can come through likely together, which is a good thing because there are some efficiencies shared between those two ordinances and it makes sense. Regarding the boundary trees, there was an email conversation. I need to go back and make sure it got to you, Ed, now that I heard that. So I'll do that. We did get a response back from our attorney's office who has some discomfort with the concept in putting it into a codified or codified and ordinance setting. But we could talk further about that offline. It's probably something better for you to have a chance to review before we have that discussion. But with or without that, it should be able to move forward with the 711 changes.
Right. Thanks. Sure. That's all we have for the policy update at this point.
Any questions for Ed? I do have a question for you, Stephanie. We started this process of discussing a tree canopy preservation ordinance way back when the Urban Forestry Commission was still within DSD. And, Ben assigned Chris to work with us on those amendments. And we continued with that process with Chris through these latest amendments that we're proposing. Since then, of course, Keith has come on board as an urban forester. So I just want to make sure with you that in addition to Keith, that we continue discussions with Chris in terms of ironing out any last minute details on these amendments before they go forward.
That's correct.
Okay,
Yeah, thank you.
good, thanks. Okay, the Urban Forest Master Plan Working Group, Ed or Zoe?
The working group, who's made up of Zoe Chardon, no, Chris, myself, and Karen, and Zoe, met last week and along with Keith to have a conversation more to begin visualizing what the process might look like. All this in advance of preparation of the RFQs to get this thing rolling. And we developed what I think is a very helpful process chart, which is made up of a series of phases. Phase one, setting up the project itself, establishing a project team, which is this master plan working group on the Urban Forestry Commission, the commission itself in the city of Asheville, and talking about what a potential advisory group might look like, which would be the larger group of others that either impact or have some interest in the urban forest, including National Park Service, U.S. Forest Service, the Forest Service Southern Research Station, which is here in Asheville, as well as the Supervisor's Office, the Dogwood Trust, UNCA, Biltmore, the neighborhood groups, AV Tech, Housing Authority, other nonprofit groups, and on and on and on. It's a pretty comprehensive list of folks that could help advise the process and also own the plan as we move forward and develop it. So we're excited about the resources we have here to really help us work through it. So we're sort of moving into that setup phase now. Once the RFQs are out and consultants are selected, we'll move into what we're calling the data collection phase, which collects data on 3 different frameworks that impact the overall management of the urban forest. The vegetation resource, which are, all the trees and natural systems that are on public property, parks, rights-of-way, cemeteries, golf courses, things like that. The resource management framework, which is how through public policy or through public works we manage the resource, and then finally the community framework, which is our partners in our communication strategies and everybody that lives, works, and plays and otherwise deals with the urban forest. So collecting data from those various perspectives, and then also the second set of data, which is stakeholder input, which is done through a variety of stakeholder engagements and partnerships and things like that, to include communications and equity and management. So those are the first 2 phases, and then the last phase, of course, is the evaluation, analysis, and plan development. So that's kind of how we envision this whole thing playing out over the next 12 to 18, perhaps 24 months. I think realistically, from the day that RFQs hit the streets to the day that we're done and we can hold up a plan and say, let's start implementing this thing, we're looking at 2 years, realistically, if we do it right. So this whole process chart's been developed and it's in Keith's hands, and I think everything is really in the city's court now in terms of developing the RFQ and getting things out on the street, but we're here as resources and here to provide as much assistance as we can. So any questions about that? So,
I'd like to point out that we talked extensively about equity issues and about involving certain constituencies from the very start of our process, especially in this larger advisory group. Like we talked about talking to the Reparations Committee and to the Racial Justice Coalition about perceptions about city trees and how we can move forward with those groups.
I might add, thank you for those notes about equity in this work. You might want to add to your resource list Bountiful Cities, because Bountiful Cities has also built some of those relationships in the community around, especially fruit-bearing trees, but they may have some relationships to add to the conversation with you.
Any other questions for Ed or Zoe? Thank you, Ed, Zoe. Thank you, Kim. We'll move on to the appropriate species list. I'm sorry, the Fee in Lieu Working Group. Zoe?
Yes, I'm still the head of the Fee in Lieu Working Group, and my 2 other members are Karen McNeil and Macy. We actually met last March before Keith came on board, and we developed some guidelines, guidance for developing the framework for considering fee in lieu, how fee in lieu funds can be managed. And I think maybe you have that, Jackson, or somewhere. Anyway, I could read through these, but I think they're basically guidance on where we might start planting trees, and also we wanted to have a way to track expenditures made from fee in lieu for reporting. And we had some questions that can be used to prioritize projects. And I would suggest that probably moving forward with this will come as part of the Urban Forest Master Plan, because I know that Keith has some really sort of exciting projects that he's planned, especially with the legacy neighborhoods like Shiloh. So the guidance that we develop could be used to start planning where we want to start those sorts of projects that we use those fees. Of course, the fees have to be used in the areas from which they were collected. So there'll have to be some way to map that out and make some sort of a resource to plan those and also to track them after we do them. So, any questions about that? We will revisit that soon when Keith gets back.
Yeah, I didn't get CC'd on those ones. If you could send me a copy of that, I can add it to meetings.
Yeah, okay.
I just had a clarifying question. What's the distance as for how far away those fees can be used for?
How far away?
So if we collect fees for a tree removed in one area, how far away must the,
You might have it, but I just, to clarify,
Yeah.
what Zoe's speaking of is the Resource Management District,
Yeah.
which we have 3, suburban, urban, and downtown. So if the fees are collected for a project in the Suburban Resource Management District, they just need to be expended somewhere in that same Resource Management District, and so on. Okay?
Thanks, Chris.
And you can see that most of them, when we look at the graph that Nancy provided us, most of them have been collected in the urban area, what's defined as the urban area so far.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you, Zoe. The appropriate species list, Karen.
So since the retreat, Keith and Chardon and I worked together and separately to try to finish off this list, and I think we are pretty close. And hopefully, I'm going to be really optimistic and say hopefully we could even be finished by next month, because it feels like we've got most of the information filled in at this point. So when Keith is back, I think he'll be able to give a better update, because this is another one of the things that's in his hands.
Yeah, I talked to Keith before he left on vacation, and he said that he has one more column to fill in, and he was going to make that a priority when he returned. Once that's done, it would be ready to go forward.
Excellent.
Any other questions? Thank you, Karen. The Education and Enforcement Working Group, Karen, you're on again.
Yes. Well, so this group, our priorities are basically to focus on education so that we can prevent the need for enforcement. So one of the things that we mentioned at the retreat was what a great opportunity the municipal golf course is to provide education to our community, and that one way that we could do that would be to have a couple signs with QR codes that link to information about critical root zones. It's such a wonderful collection of city trees, and I think it's very much appreciated by all of Asheville. There's some really gorgeous trees there, and I think that using that area as a resource for educating our community would be really helpful, a really helpful continuation of community engagement.
Thank you, Karen. Any questions for Karen? Thanks again. The next item, just as a reminder that we believe discussed at the retreat, and this was a suggestion that came from our council liaison, Kim Roney, about the possibility of appointing outside consultants or experts to work to help the working groups with their mandates for the edification of you, JM and Patricia. Our working groups are restricted to 4 members, because if we have more than 4, then it becomes a quorum, and everything has to be advertised, and public has a chance to to come and view the working groups, and the working groups are set up not to necessarily hide what we're doing, but just streamline things and make that work quicker. So I will be putting together something for the commission to consider at the next meeting in terms of adopting a formal policy of bringing on board people with expertise in the specific areas that working groups are working on, and so that we can adopt that and get that going.
If I might add some clarity, sorry, the sun is like right in my eye right now. Because you're using working groups that have less than a quorum of the commission, you have so much flexibility that you don't actually have to appoint members to the working groups that are outside of the committee. So it might look like a resource list or a procedure for inviting new people. But for example, we had plenty of applicants for the openings on the Urban Forestry Commission. Inviting community members to bring their professional and lived experience to work groups can be a great way to build relationships and to recruit future members. But you might also find that the work groups may want to engage in conversations with folks that are out of town. So you have a lot of flexibility because they're not appointments, that you don't have to require official action unless that's going to be the policy that the UFC establishes.
Right. Yeah, just for a clarification, I didn't mean appointment in terms of official appointment, but just people that we can, the working group chairs and the working group members may want to bring in to help facilitate their work. I think we have room on the fee and lieu working group and the education and enforcement working group, and I'll be talking with JM and Patricia to see what, which of those they would like to be on, so we could get them involved and fill out the working group membership.
And also on policy, because I'm not on there.
Okay, you're not on there anymore. Okay, and the policy working group. Okay, thank you very much. I believe that ends our old business. We'll go now to, oh, no, we're not. So the missing middle housing update, I'm not going to give you any more than what Videla already gave to you in terms of, in honoring commission members, we had a discussion, a prior meeting of planting trees to honor some of our former commission members who were term limited and had to rotate off. And I had asked for recommendations from commission members on a location to plant those trees and erect a plaque. And I did get a commitment from Asheville Greenworks to supply the trees for that. But I really would like to get some recommendations from commission members where that location might be. So please think about that and shoot me some emails so we can move on that. Any questions or discussions? Okay. So the annual retreat recap, I'm not going to go over it. It's on your list of documents based on some of the remarks made by some of the working group members. I'm going to update that so that it becomes an official document of our goals and priorities for 2024, and that will serve as objectives that we shoot for this year, as well as the basis for the report that I'll be giving to the City Council's Environment and Public Safety Committee later in the year, and ultimately to the city council at the beginning of next year, so we can measure our accomplishments against the goals and priorities that we set for the year. Okay, new business. Jay Dundas, he is the Director of Capital Improvements. Just before he starts, a quick reminder. As you all know, we had some issues brought to us by residents regarding the sidewalk project on Vermont Avenue in West Asheville, as well as the sidewalk project along Newhall Creek Road in East Asheville, and then some current concerns about the plans to put a public restroom, I think on the corner of Rankin and College Avenue, and which would require removal of two mature trees there. So the discussion became, how could we get this information to us in a more timely fashion? Because once it comes to us, it's so far down the planning and design stage for these projects that we can't really influence it. So with the hope of influencing these early on in the very initial discussions on planning and design of projects initiated by capital improvements, Ed Macy and I did meet with Jay Dundas to discuss that and lay it out. I'm happy to say that Jay was very welcoming to have that kind of process and bring us into the early stages of projects so we could make recommendations to his department on when it comes to tree removal or tree planting. So Jay wanted to come here today to give us an update on the projects that are on his books for the year and get this process rolling. So with that, go ahead.
I appreciate that. Jay Dundas, Capital Projects Director, and yeah, I was going to make kind of similar explanation. This is in response to a request for advance notice on projects. I will caveat that in the discussions that we had, that those projects will have limited details at that point in time. I mean, we're not in design. A couple of the projects that I'll mention today are in the design phases, but the details on, related to the impacts on vegetation are limited at this point, which again, this is like an advanced look, maybe even years in advance for projects, and really showing the impact, like from the alignment and the extents of the project. But this does not prevent us from being able to bring a more detailed presentation related to individual projects in the future. This is the first attempt at this, and so we do plan on this not being the last attempt. And so we would, this is essentially a reflection of our FY '24 capital budget. That looks at a 5-year planning period. I'll kind of explain that here in a second. And then our FY '25 budget will be approved later this spring. And so we could certainly come back. I'm happy to come back and talk about these projects in a little more detail. Anything that's additionally added, or anything that's added to the CIP for FY '25, bring those up as well. And then, so with no further ado, I will get into the projects. So just a simple rundown of our capital budget process. They're updated annually. And with the new projects, generally projects are added in the latter years. So it's ideal to have them added in the 5th year of this 5-year budget outlook. And then they advance once the council actually approves only 1 year, but they advance into that approval year over that 5-year period. City Council adopts the single fiscal year, which is the upcoming fiscal year. Staff submits projects in the fall. Those projects are reviewed through the process, which we're under review right now. And the project's funds are approved for expenditure late in the spring, and then those funds are available July 1st of that fiscal year. So for example, July 1st of 2024, we'll authorize funds for July, or fiscal year 25, which is technically in the calendar, July 2024 through June 2025. In most cases, the authorization of funding allows for the design to start, was essentially saying that once the funding is available, we'll commit to design. And then scope should be developed prior to estimating and budget submission. We are working to make sure that we are doing better at developing our scopes, which will help with the impact, but it also helps us do better budgeting. Many of you probably have seen this before. This is a clip out of our annual budget. This is online under the Finance Department's budgeting page. This represents a 5-year outlook that I'd mentioned. The projects that are listed that are specific to streets and sidewalks are presented here. Beaverview Road pedestrian improvements is a project that we don't have a lot of detail on. As a matter of fact, I'm not even sure the extent of this. So in this streets and sidewalks project, I don't have a lot of detail. I will get into more detail as in other areas. Pedestrian improvements are in fact sidewalk projects for the future, but they're, individually we work our transportation department to identify those projects as they come. Neighborhood sidewalks very similar. Now with that, the lack of detail on individual projects, I would like to talk about something that Mr. Gilbert and Mr. Macy and I talked about was the standards that we use to develop sidewalks. So when we put together a sidewalk in the CBD, the downtown area, that sidewalk is typically going to shoot for a 10-foot of space with clear space allowing for the ADA accessibility requirements. And then also where achievable, street trees. So certainly there are complete streets elements to these things as well, potentially stormwater elements. But examples of these projects include Haywood Street, which was built in FY20, and then also actually 2021. And then Cox Avenue, which is actually funded for FY25. It's actually a placemaking project too, I just realized that. In residential neighborhoods, typically we're going to go for a 6-foot back of curb and I'll touch on it in a minute, a 5-foot sidewalk behind a 5-foot planting strip or utility strip or parking strip, whatever you call that green space. But it's essentially, in a lot of cases, right-of-way limitations are the thing that really dictate what we're going to be able to build. The picture you see on the left here, I'm sorry, on the right is Fulton Street. Fulton Street is a very narrow street. As you can tell in the picture, the house is fairly close. There's to the back of that stem wall there behind the sidewalk. We did have to purchase right-of-way in order to build this there. And this is a 6-foot sidewalk, so if you can imagine the other 5 and 5, that's 10 foot, that would be an additional 4 feet into that front yard. So these are things that we have to determine when we're building any sidewalk in any neighborhood. The best opportunity for additional vegetation in these areas with a 6-foot back of curb is a bump out. With the street width, in this case, it would be challenging, but then also on the private properties. Other examples of 6-foot back of curb sidewalks are Hill Street. New Leicester Highway is going in right now, and then New Haw Creek, which was mentioned earlier, and then Johnston Boulevard. And all of those have very tight right-of-ways in which for us to work. We actually, because of right-of-way limitations, do not build a lot of 5-foot 5 and 5 sidewalks. It's difficult to obtain the right-of-way, but they do actually provide an opportunity for the tree planting in that vegetative strip between. Actually, one of the only examples that I could think of was Brevard Road out by the interchange. and the car dealerships out there. I'm sure we do have other examples, but in preparing this is one I came up with. So again, not talking about specific projects in that, but really trying to explain the design considerations that we have to make in order to build sidewalks in these areas. Please interrupt. We have placemaking is another item, another bucket in our CI capital budget. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them at any time. The highlighted projects here in the yellow are Cox Avenue Complete Streets. Again, I included that as a CBD project, is in fact both. I-26 improvements, we are a participant in that. As you can see, the funding sources, the FY25 for Cox Avenue Complete Streets, and FY27 for I-26 improvements in Livingston Complete Street. What we do know about Cox Avenue is that we are considering, it's all budget contingent, but we're considering a project that extends from Patton Avenue to Southside Avenue. This project is currently under design. We're working towards meeting the urban standard for the street trees, and then also sidewalk widths of 10 feet where achievable. I have included the top picture indicates some of the vegetative treatments that can be used in an urban setting that are not only provide street trees, but also stormwater treatment opportunities. So those are certainly in consideration right now. And then, as you are well aware, downtown environments pose challenges with soil volumes because of the use of the right-of-way. They're tight with utilities, and everything you can imagine that's would be buried in a downtown setting is in fact. It's a half-mile project. I-26 is one that I did pull from the budget. I do not have a lot of detail on. I did pull this map off of the NCDOT website. It does mention impact areas. I do know that we have a team that is working with the DOT related to the beautification of the aesthetics of the highway reconstruction, but also the impacts. And so the design for us and for me in particular is really limited to what you see here.
Jay, can we press pause on that for a second? It might benefit this group to know that we just did pass a recommendation regarding the design speed. So by reducing the design speed across the Bowen Bridge section, there's potential for different landscaping and tree planting than it would be if it was at 40 miles per hour. And my understanding is that now that we've passed it, that's headed to DOT for a final decision.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Livingston Street is a complete street that is budgeted for 2027 as well. There are opportunities to preserve existing street trees along Livingston Street. We are working there's quite a few different projects that are happening with Livingston, including the road resurfacing, which I believe is going to happen soon, this spring maybe. And then pedestrian safety improvements are really the focus of the project long term. And then ADA accessibility improvements at intersections and then also throughout the corridor with the sidewalks. This is a fairly long project for us, similar to Haw Creek and Johnston Boulevard. The right-of-way, because of the existing sidewalks, might not be as restrictive as some of those other ones, but still is always something we have to consider. Recreation and entertainment facilities. Again, this is a long list of projects that each one of these could have an impact on the vegetation in these areas. Often, I start at the top. The Carrier Park Playground is something that we are currently trying to purchase equipment. It's going to be a replacement in kind. And so, not wanting to actually dive deep into every one of these projects and make the best use of your time, This is essentially just the playground replacement, but it'll be a one-for-one replacement of what's existing. The lawn bowling turf replacement, for example, 2027 is just a replacement of that, the artificial surface out there. The two projects that I did want to highlight in this is McCormick Field, our $35 million project. I would use this as an example of, again, it's good practice to introduce a project in 2028 in this example and watch it move forward as the years progress. Sometimes we have a project that's introduced at a different time frame. McCormick Field was one of those. So we are working on design, but we don't really have the details of, we're working very quickly through design, but we don't have the details of the overall impact to the site at this point. And then also the general parks facilities upgrades, I've got examples of that as well. And that's a project that, as you can see, is funded annually, and Parks Department decides how that's going to be spent on those as those funds are available, maybe a year or so in advance. McCormick Field, the highlights on this image show where the main impacts of the work will be. You can see as far as with regard to as close to the vegetation as you're going to get on this site would be the upper right-hand side, the third baseline. That area is going to be reconstructed, and there will be some encroachment on the hill, but it's going to be we're going to try to minimize that, because once you start getting into that hill, you start building retaining walls, and that gets really expensive. And then the outfield fence will be replaced. There was a previous expectation where we would build a concourse around the facility. Budget looks like that might limit our opportunities to do that, but there still will be the vegetation and that toe of that slope in the outfield really push up to the bottom of that wall, so there could certainly be some impact there. Shiloh is a parks facility upgrade that that on the top right here. As I had said, these are various parks throughout the Asheville park system. Typically, they're renewal of existing assets. The blue court you see in the Shiloh picture is replacement of an old, outdated, really court that was in really bad shape. And then the new play feature on the colorful is the colorful equipment there was just an addition that was made several years ago. I use this as an example. I know we're looking forward. These are just examples of how these parks projects, when they're introduced, obviously in a park, they're trying to preserve the landscape as much as possible and have a low impact. They can have impact on trees, but there are also opportunities for new trees as well. Walton Street is another example. The trail, you can see how the disturbed earth, that's actually for the construction of that trail, which is a new feature in the Walton Street park system. Okay, so I should have had a conclusion slide on there, but that really concludes the slide. And like I said, this is version 1 of this, and I hope it's helpful, but I understand also that it might not have hit the exact mark. But we will have a new CIP approved in July. I'm willing to schedule in advance to come back and talk about that, and we can certainly tweak what it is that you expect and want to see. Again, this also does not prevent us from coming back with specific projects. We will need to come back for the specific projects and to get your thoughts, and then just also inform you on how those projects are progressing. So with that, I'm open for questions.
Anybody have any questions? Short
Yeah,
on?
thank you for the presentation.
Sure.
My question is, in what capacities are you utilizing, either Mark as a city arborist or other certified arborist in the planning process around these areas that trees are going to be impacted?
That's a great question. We rely heavily on Public Works and Mark, and then also we have called in outside arborists for some help, again, under Mark's advisement. I will actually dial back to the downtown restroom project. At one point in time, There was options for that project that would remove the trees, and the actual the option that is on the table right now that is going to council on Tuesday and was there a week and a half ago, is it preserves the existing trees. So with, again, Mark's help, we assessed the trees, looked at pruning opportunities to make sure that they stayed healthy for as long as they could, and actually lift the canopy, so maybe there's a better sight lines into the park, but those trees in what we're presenting right now stay.
Chris?
Thank you for sharing all that.
Sure.
I learned a lot. I just had this is a really small thing. Obviously, think about it's a really big picture here. When you're doing the park, and I'll forgive my ignorance on what we already have, but as I'm thinking about the future for like park improvements, one thing that comes up again and again is the wish that we had installed water access, like beforehand. I've seen this in like other cities, so I was curious like what our status might be in our parks for water access, and if there's plans as we do improvements to install public water access in the forms of whether it's drinking water, but also like hose hookups.
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. I know that if we have facilities, restrooms, for example, obviously we're going to bring water in. And the reason I highlight that is, for example, Richmond Hill, we built the restroom out there and had to run a fairly significant amount of new water line to that. I think it would be something for us to consider in the future as these parks develop. I'm really, in the areas where we have built those facilities, obviously that's an expectation for those, but I'll take it back for the team to look at making sure we're looking at water connections in the future for those other parks. Yeah, that's
Anyone
good, sir.
else? Thank you very much, Jay.
Sure.
We look forward to you coming back and for updated capital improvement project list, as well as coming back with when you have more details on specific projects.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
And Mark, thank you for your input on the public restroom project.
You're welcome. I didn't, as the design was being first discussed, I didn't really see the need to remove the trees. It looked like we had opportunities to work with them. So, sorry if that came as a shock to everybody.
Well, thank you. Okay, the next item on the agenda, I think we already took care of. That was a discussion about recommendation to change the priorities of the city arborists to not do the holiday lights. So we've covered that. The last item on the agenda, a couple weeks ago, Zoe and I met with Kim Roney to discuss a more formal process for appointing applicants to fill vacancies on the Urban Forestry Commission. We had a good discussion. We came up with a process in which the chair and the vice chair, regardless of who they are, would review the applicants on the list and come up with one or two recommendations for each vacancy. We would then take that to Kim for a discussion on those recommendations. She can give us some feedback and input, and then once we're on the same page with that, we will bring those recommendations back to the full commission for consideration before we pass those on to the City Council's Board and Commissions Committee. That way, and Kim is on that committee, and that way it ensures that the commission and Kim are on the same page and we can go forward with our recommendations to that committee and then on to the full Does anybody have any questions or comments they'd like to make on that? Do you feel the need to formalize that, or does this work for everyone?
Works for me.
Okay.
It just is a matter of process. It is always up to the council to make the appointment. But obviously, the recommendation of our advisory boards is very helpful in making that decision. We do try to prioritize local residents when we're filling our advisory boards. And we have a history of appointing people that are not local residents, maybe county residents, when there is professional or lived experience that's needed at the table that isn't yet at the table. So I'm looking forward to formalizing a conversation and making sure that I can do my job as a liaison and carrying that communication forward.
On one of the points that Kim made, we did discuss the possibility of creating a seat on the Urban Forestry Commission that would be filled by a county resident. As you know, we have a seat on the commission. It's a voting seat for Duke Energy. They haven't sent anybody to our commission meetings for probably since 2018. And I think one of our recommendations in the UDO amendments was to eliminate that seat. But we had discussions about replacing that with a seat for someone from Buncombe County. And that would be part of the policy working group's discussion with elected officials and staff, county staff, on trying to better coordinate and cooperate the activities that we do on the Urban Forestry Commission for the city of Asheville and extending that to the county, whether that results in just better cooperation or results in the county implementing policies, procedures, or ordinance changes. You know, the urban forests, like trees or like streets and sewer systems and water systems, don't necessarily stop at the city line. So what happens in the county can very much affect the urban forest in the city. So we will be developing that further and bringing back something more specific to the commission. Any questions?
I have just a thought that if we move forward with including a commissioner from the county, can it also be somebody that is involved in a county commission related to trees or sustainability or something like that, so there's some crossover?
We can do that. I would suggest that you talk to Chris, if you worry about that. Yeah. I think he's trying to schedule a meeting, an initial meeting with a member of the Buncombe County Board of Commissioners to sort of get this started, and that could possibly be something that he could bring up and discuss at that initial meeting. Okay? Is there anything else that anyone else wants to bring up at the meeting? No? Okay, then unless I get a dissenting vote, I hereby say that the February 2024 meeting of the Urban Forestry Commission is hereby adjourned. Thank you, everyone.